It was a bright, sunny Saturday morning in Willow Creek, a quiet little cul-de-sac where everything looked perfect. Every lawn was cut just right, like a green carpet stretched across the ground. Every mailbox sparkled in the sunlight, so shiny you could almost see your face in it. Kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing and calling to each other. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or sipped coffee on their porches. It felt like the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. But looks can fool you, and Willow Creek was hiding something big. Out front of our new house, my wife, Sarah Thompson, was busy in the garden. She knelt in the dirt, her hands covered in little bits of soil, planting bright red tulips in neat rows. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she hummed a soft tune as she worked. To everyone who passed by, Sarah seemed like just another mom. We'd only moved in a month ago, so folks didn't know much about her. They saw her friendly smile and quiet ways and figured she was ordinary. "Oh, that's the new mom," they'd say, nodding like they had her all figured out. But here's the truth, and you better hold on tight for this. Sarah wasn't ordinary at all, not even close. Behind her warm brown eyes, the kind that made you feel safe and happy, was a secret so big it could make your jaw drop to the floor. Nobody in Willow Creek had any idea who she really was. Not the neighbors who waved at her, not the kids who zoomed by on their scooters, not even me sometimes, and I was married to her. All they saw was a lady planting flowers, but Sarah was so much more. If they knew what was coming, they'd have been too shocked to speak. Now, before I go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who seemed super normal but turned out to be totally amazing? Maybe a kid at school who you thought was quiet but then scored the winning goal in soccer. Or a teacher who looked boring but told the coolest stories. Think about it and maybe drop your answer in the comments later. Oh, and if you love hearing about surprises like this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Okay, back to Willow Creek. This wasn't just any neighborhood. Sure, it looked all nice and cozy with its perfect lawns and friendly waves, but there was something else going on, something that made my stomach twist when I thought about it. Willow Creek had a homeowners association, an HOA they called it. Sounds boring, right? Like a club for grown-ups who care about grass and fences. But this HOA wasn't like that, oh no. They were more like a pack of wolves, sneaky and mean, always watching for someone to mess up. The HOA had rules, tons of rules. Your grass couldn't be too long, your mailbox had to be just the right color, your trash cans had to be hidden by 6 a.m. or else. If you broke even one tiny rule, they didn't just send you a note. They came after you like hunters chasing a deer. They'd slap you with fines, big ones that made your wallet cry. They'd send letters that sounded like they were yelling at you. And if you didn't fix things fast, they'd show up at your door, acting like they owned the whole neighborhood. Most folks in Willow Creek were scared of the HOA. They'd whisper about it when they thought no one was listening. "Don't make them mad," they'd say, shaking their heads. "They'll make your life miserable." I saw it happen to a guy down the street. He painted his fence blue, bright, happy blue, and the HOA lost their minds. They sent him so many angry letters he finally painted it gray just to make them stop. Another lady planted roses instead of daisies, and the HOA fined her until she yanked them out. It was like living in a place where you couldn't breathe without permission. Sarah, though, she didn't seem worried, not one bit. When we moved in, I told her about the HOA. I showed her the big book of rules they'd dropped off, thicker than my old math textbook. They sound like trouble, I said, frowning, but Sarah just flipped through the pages, her lips curling into a tiny smile. Let them try, she said, her voice soft but strong, like she knew something I didn't. I figured she was just being brave. Moving to a new place is hard, and maybe she didn't want to stress about it, but looking back, I should have known. Sarah wasn't the type to back down, not ever. That Saturday morning, as she planted those tulips, everything felt calm. The sun was warm, the birds were singing, and the air smelled like fresh dirt and flowers. Sarah looked happy, patting the soil around each tulip like she was tucking it into bed. I stood on the porch, sipping my coffee, watching her work. Looking good, I called out. She glanced up and grinned, her eyes sparkling. Just wait, she said, it's gonna be beautiful. A few neighbors walked by, smiling and waving. Nice flowers, one lady said, pushing a stroller. Thanks, Sarah called back, all friendly. Another guy walking his fluffy dog stopped to chat. Tulips, huh, that's different, he said, scratching his head. Hope the HOA doesn't mind. Sarah's smile didn't waver. Oh, I think it'll be fine, she said, her voice so smooth you'd believe her. The guy nodded and kept walking, probably thinking she was just a nice new neighbor. But the HOA, they were already watching. I didn't know it then, but they'd been keeping an eye on us since we moved in. New people always got extra attention, like they had to prove they'd follow the rules. And those tulips, to the HOA, they weren't just flowers, they were a problem, a big red, blooming problem. See, the HOA had a list of approved plants and tulips weren't on it. Sounds silly, right? Who cares what flowers you plant? But to them, it was like Sarah had painted a giant target on our house. I found out later that Greg Larson, the HOA president, drove by that morning. He was the kind of guy who thought he was king of Willow Creek. He wore fancy polo shirts and sunglasses even when it wasn't sunny, and he always had this smirk, like he knew he could make you squirm. When he saw Sarah's tulips, his eyes narrowed. He didn't stop to talk, he didn't wave, he just drove off, already planning his next move. Greg wasn't the type to let things slide. If you broke his rules, he'd come for you, and he'd make sure everyone knew it. Sarah, though, kept planting. She didn't look up when Greg's car rolled by. She didn't flinch when another neighbor whispered, "Be careful with those flowers." She just kept digging, humming, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. I watched her, feeling a little nervous. You sure about this? I asked, stepping closer. The HOA's pretty strict. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. Don't worry, she said, her eyes twinkling. I've got this. And that's when I should have known something was up. Sarah wasn't just planting tulips for fun. Those flowers weren't random. They were part of something bigger, something nobody in Willow Creek could have guessed. To everyone else, she was the new mom, the quiet lady who seemed sweet and harmless. But Sarah was like a puzzle with missing pieces. Every smile, every calm word, every tulip she planted, it was all leading to something huge. Willow Creek thought they had her figured out. They thought she was an easy target, someone they could push around. The HOA thought they could scare her, make her follow their rules like everyone else. But they were wrong. So wrong. Sarah wasn't just a mom, she wasn't just a gardener. She was a storm waiting to hit, and nobody saw it coming. As I stood there watching her dig in the dirt, I had no idea what was about to happen. I didn't know the HOA was already plotting against us. I didn't know Greg was typing up a nasty letter that'd show up by Monday. I didn't know Sarah's tulips were more than flowers. They were a signal, a plan, a spark that set everything on fire. All I knew was that my wife looked happy, and our new home felt like a fresh start. But fresh starts don't always stay calm. Sometimes they turn into battles, and Sarah, she was ready for one. The HOA thought they were the wolves, but they didn't know they'd just stepped into a lion's den. Those tulips were just the beginning, and Willow Creek was about to get the surprise of a lifetime. So what do you think? Ever had a neighbor who seemed normal but turned out to be super cool? Or maybe you've dealt with rules that felt unfair? Let me know in the comments and stick around, because this story about to get wild. The trouble kicked off with a letter. It showed up on a quiet Sunday, slipped right under our front door like a sneaky snake. I found it first, lying there on the mat, all crisp and official looking. The words were written in big, sharp letters, so angry they practically shouted off the page. Your garden violates HOA standards. Remove those unauthorized tulips by Monday or face consequences. I read it twice, my stomach twisting. Consequences? For flowers? I handed it to Sarah, my wife, who was sipping tea at the kitchen table. Sarah took one look at the letter, raised an eyebrow, and let out a little laugh. Tulips, she said, shaking her head. They're picking a fight over tulips. Then she crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash like it was just a piece of junk mail. I stared at her, surprised. You're not worried? I asked. She shrugged, her smile small but confident. Nope, she said simply and went back to her tea. I thought maybe she didn't get how serious this was, but Sarah, she always knew more than she let on. See, the HOA, the Homeowners Association, didn't mess around in Willow Creek. They weren't just a bunch of grown-ups making boring rules. They were like bullies who ran the neighborhood. If they said your grass was too tall, you cut it. If they didn't like your mailbox, you changed it. And if you ignored them, like Sarah just did with that letter, they came after you. Hard. I'd heard stories about people getting huge fines, so big they had to borrow money to pay them. One guy even moved away because the HOA wouldn't leave him alone. That's how mean they could be. Monday morning rolled around, bright and sunny, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. I was out getting the newspaper when I saw him, Greg Larson, the HOA president. He marched up our driveway, wearing a crisp blue polo shirt and sunglasses perched on his nose. His smirk was so nasty it could make milk go sour. He didn't even knock. He just stood there, hands on his hips, looking at Sarah's tulips like they'd insulted him personally. Sarah was outside, watering the garden. She wore her usual jeans and a t-shirt, her hair tied back. She looked calm, like she didn't notice Greg at all, but I knew she saw him. She always saw everything. Greg cleared his throat, loud enough for the whole street to hear. Mrs. Thompson, he called, his voice sharp and bossy. You're new here, so I'll give you a chance. Those tulips break the rule. Get rid of them by tomorrow or we'll fine you. And if you don't listen, we'll come dig them up ourselves. A few neighbors peeked out their windows, watching like it was a show. I felt my face get hot. Why was he talking to her like that? I wanted to say something, but Sarah beat me to it. She turned off the hose and looked at Greg, her smile cool and steady. Thanks for the heads up, she said, her voice polite but firm, like she was talking to a kid throwing a tantrum. She didn't argue, she didn't yell. She just nodded, her eyes locked on his, like she was figuring him out. Greg blinked, surprised. I think he expected her to beg or apologize. When she didn't, his smirk got even bigger, like he thought he'd won a big prize. "Good choice," he said, all smug. Then he spun around and strutted back to his shiny golf cart, the kind he drove everywhere to look important. He zoomed off, leaving a puff of dust behind. I watched him go, my stomach churning. "He's trouble," I said to Sarah. She wiped her hands on her jeans and grinned. "Let him try," she said, her voice so calm it gave me chills. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her eyes had this spark, like she knew something nobody else did. Greg thought he'd scared her. He thought she'd pull out those tulips and follow his rules. Oh, he was so wrong. He didn't know he'd just poked a sleeping lion, and that lion was ready to roar. What Greg didn't understand, what nobody in Willow Creek understood, was that Sarah's tulips weren't just pretty flowers. They weren't there because she liked gardening. Those bright red blooms were a signal, a secret code for something way bigger than anyone could guess. I didn't know it then, but Sarah wasn't planting them for fun. Every tulip was part of a plan so huge it could shake the whole neighborhood. And Greg's little visit, it was like lighting a match near a pile of fireworks. The rest of the day, things felt weird. Neighbors kept sneaking glances at our house. Some looked worried, like they felt bad for us. Others smirked, like they were excited to see us get in trouble. I heard one lady whisper to her friend, "They'll learn soon enough. Nobody beats the HOA." I wanted to tell them they were wrong, but I didn't know why I felt that way. I just knew Sarah wasn't scared, and that made me feel braver, too. That night, I found Sarah in the garage looking at her phone. The screen glowed with words I couldn't read, strange letters and numbers like a puzzle. "Everything okay?" I asked, leaning against the door. She glanced up, her face serious for a second, then she smiled. "All good," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Just checking on some things." I nodded, but I wondered what she meant. What kind of things, and why did she look so focused? By Tuesday, another letter arrived. This one was even meaner. "You ignored our warning. Remove the tulips now or pay a $500 fine." I showed it to Sarah, expecting her to get mad, but she just laughed again, louder this time. "They're really trying," she said, tossing it in the trash with the first one. "Sarah," I said, worried now, "this is serious. They could make us pay." She looked at me, her eyes steady. "They can try," she said again, and I swear I saw a flicker of excitement in her face, like she was ready for a fight. Greg and his HOA buddies didn't stop. They started driving by our house every day, slow and creepy, like sharks circling a boat. They'd stare at the tulips, then at Sarah, then at me. It made my skin crawl. Neighbors stopped waving as much. Some even crossed the street to avoid us, like we had a big sign that said trouble. The air in Willow Creek felt thick, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the HOA to win. But Sarah, she didn't care. She kept watering her tulips, humming like nothing was wrong. She'd wave at the neighbors, even the ones who ignored her. She'd nod at Greg when he drove by, her smile never fading. It was like she was playing a game and she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I didn't know what she was planning, but I knew one thing: Greg's power trip was about to crash and burn. He thought he was the boss, but he didn't know who he was messing with, not yet. The days after Greg's big visit got crazy. The HOA wasn't playing nice anymore. They turned up the heat, like bullies who thought they could scare Sarah into doing what they wanted. Every morning, I'd check the mailbox or under the door and there'd be another letter. Each one was meaner than the last, written in big angry words that made my stomach hurt. One said, "You're breaking the rules. Take out those tulips or we'll take you to court." Another one barked, "Your defiance is not okay. Stop now." I read them and felt nervous. Court, that sounded bad, but Sarah, she didn't care one bit. She'd pick up each letter, skim it, and laugh softly like it was a silly note from a kid. Then she'd toss it in the trash with the others. "They're really trying hard," she'd say, her eyes sparkling like she was having fun. I'd stare at her, confused. "Sarah, aren't you worried? They sound serious," I said one day, holding up a letter that threatened a huge fine. She just shrugged and smiled. "Let them try," she said, her voice calm but strong, like she knew something big was coming. I didn't know what she meant, but I trusted her. Sarah always had a plan. The HOA didn't stop with letters. Oh no. Greg and his buddies started acting like spies. They'd park their shiny golf carts right across from our house, just sitting there watching. Greg would lean back, arms crossed, his sunglasses hiding his eyes. His friends would scribble notes like they were keeping track of every move we made. It was creepy. I'd peek through the curtains and see them staring at Sarah's tulips, then at our front door, like they were waiting for her to give up. They thought she'd crack, that she'd rip out those flowers and beg them to stop. But Sarah, she didn't even blink. Neighbors started talking, too. Some felt bad for us. I'd hear them whisper when I walked by. "Poor new folks," one lady said, shaking her head. "They don't know what they're up against." But others, they were mean about it. They'd smirk and gossip like they were excited to see us lose. "She's in big trouble," a guy said to his friend, chuckling. "Nobody beats Greg and the HOA." I wanted to yell at them, to tell them they were wrong, but I kept quiet. I didn't know why, but I had this feeling Sarah was going to surprise everyone. While all this was happening, Sarah acted like nothing was wrong. She'd go out to the garden every day, watering her tulips, pulling tiny weeds, humming a happy tune. She looked so relaxed, like she was playing a game and winning. I'd watch her from the porch, amazed. How could she stay so calm? The whole neighborhood was buzzing, the HOA was breathing down our necks, and she was just gardening. It didn't make sense. But then I started noticing things, little clues that told me Sarah wasn't as relaxed as she seemed. One night I found her in the living room, sitting in the dark. She was staring at her phone, the screen glowing with words I couldn't understand. There were strange letters and numbers, like a secret code. I saw a map with a blinking dot and names I'd never heard before. It looked important, like something from a spy movie. "Everything okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She looked up, her face serious for a second. Then she winked, like it was no big deal. "Just tying up some loose ends," she said, her voice light. She turned off the phone and stood up, smiling like nothing happened. I nodded, but my mind was racing. What was she doing? What kind of loose ends? The next day, something wild happened, the first real hint that Greg was in for trouble. I woke up early and heard yelling outside. I ran to the window and saw Greg storming down the street, his face as red as a tomato. He was headed straight for our house. Behind him, a few neighbors were peeking out, looking confused. When he got to our yard, he pointed at Sarah, who was calmly watering her tulips. "You did this," he shouted, so loud the whole street could hear. "You stole them." Sarah turned off the hose and tilted her head, all innocent. "Stole what?" she asked, her voice smooth as butter. Greg was shaking, he was so mad. My roses, he yelled, my prize roses, they're gone, not dead, not dug up, just gone. I stepped outside, curious. Greg's roses were his favorite thing. He bragged about them all the time, saying they won awards. Now they were missing, that was weird. Sarah didn't flinch, she just shrugged. That's too bad, Greg, she said, sounding sweet but firm. But I was here all night, maybe check your security cameras. Greg's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish. He didn't know what to say. He just glared at her, then stomped off, muttering about calling the police. I looked at Sarah, my eyebrows raised. Did you? I started to ask, but she just smiled, a tiny, sneaky smile, and went back to her tulips. I didn't push her, I knew better. Later, I heard from a neighbor that Greg's cameras, the ones he bragged about watching everything, had stopped working that night. No video, no proof, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch and turned them off. I thought about Sarah, about her phone and those strange messages. Was she behind it? I didn't know, but I started to wonder. She wasn't just gardening anymore. She was watching Greg and his HOA crew, noticing everything they did. The way Greg always drove by at 3 p.m., the way his buddies met at his house every Tuesday, the way they wrote down every little thing about our yard. Sarah saw it all, and she was keeping track. Every day, things got tenser. The HOA sent more letters piling up in our trash can. They parked closer to our house, their eyes like hawks. Neighbors stopped talking to us like we were bad news, but Sarah kept going, calm as ever. She'd garden, wave at kids riding by, even nod at Greg when he glared at her. It was like she was building something, step by step, and nobody could see it but her. One afternoon, I caught her digging in the backyard, not the front. She was planting something small, not a tulip, but she covered it up fast when she saw me. Just a little project, she said, dusting off her hands. Her eyes had that spark again, the one that made me think she was up to something huge. I didn't ask more, I just watched her, amazed. Whatever she was doing, it was bringing her closer to flipping Greg's world upside down. The HOA thought they had her trapped. Greg thought he was winning, but they didn't know Sarah. They didn't know her tulips were more than flowers. They didn't know she was ready for them, watching, waiting, planning. Every letter, every glare, every golf cart parked outside, it was just making her stronger. And me, I was starting to believe she was about to pull off something nobody would forget. Friday morning came, and the whole neighborhood felt different, like the air was buzzing with something big. The sun was shining, but it didn't feel warm. It felt like a spotlight waiting to show everyone what was about to happen. The HOA had been pushing Sarah all week, sending mean letters and parking outside our house, glaring at her tulips like they were the worst thing ever. But today they decided to stop talking and start acting. They were ready to make their big move, and they thought they'd win. I was in the kitchen pouring cereal when I heard the rumble of engines outside. I peeked through the window and saw Greg Larson, the HOA president, marching up our driveway. He wasn't alone. 4 other guys were with him, all wearing matching blue polo shirts like they were part of some bossy club. They carried shovels, and their grins were so smug they looked like they'd already won a prize. Greg stopped right in front of Sarah's garden, his hands on his hips. "Time up, Mrs. Thompson." He shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're ripping out those tulips today, no more games." Neighbors started poking their heads out. Some opened their windows, leaning out to watch. Others stepped onto their porches, whispering to each other. A few kids on bikes stopped riding, their eyes wide. It was like the whole cul-de-sac had turned into a big show and Greg was the star. He loved it. He stood there, smirking, acting like he owned the whole street. The other guys spread out, ready to dig, their shovels glinting in the sun. I felt my heart pound. This was bad. They were really going to destroy Sarah's garden. I ran to the front door worried. "Sarah," I called, hoping she'd know what to do. She was already there, stepping out onto the porch, but she didn't look like the Sarah I saw every day. Gone were her usual jeans and t-shirt, the ones she wore to garden or make dinner. Instead, she had on a sleek black jacket that made her look strong, like a hero in a movie. She stood tall, her shoulders straight, her chin up. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, like she could see right through Greg. The air around her felt heavy, like a storm was about to break loose. Greg didn't notice the change. He was too busy acting big. "You had your chance," he said, waving his hand at the tulips. "Now we fix this." He laughed, a mean, loud laugh that made my stomach twist. His buddies laughed too, gripping their shovels tighter. The crowd got quiet, waiting to see what Sarah would do. I held my breath, wondering if she'd argue or beg them to stop. But Sarah didn't beg. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at Greg, her lips curling into a tiny smile. "Greg," she said, her voice soft but strong, like it could carry across the whole neighborhood, "you might want to rethink this." Her words hung in the air, clear and steady. Greg blinked, confused. He wasn't used to people talking back. "What?" he snapped, his smirk fading just a little. He opened his mouth to say more, but then something happened, something nobody expected. A loud roar filled the street. Two big black SUVs zoomed into the cul-de-sac, their tires screeching as they stopped right in front of our house. The doors flew open and out jumped 6 people, 3 men and 3 women. They moved fast, like they'd done this a million times. They wore dark clothes and each one had a tiny earpiece, like spies in a movie. Their faces were serious and they spread out, looking at Greg and his crew like they were sizing them up. The neighbors gasped. The kids on bikes froze. Even Greg's buddies stopped grinning. Greg's shovel slipped from his hand and clanged on the ground. His mouth dropped open and his eyes got wide like he'd seen a ghost. What's this?" he stammered, his voice shaky. The crowd went so quiet you could hear a bird chirping far away. Everyone was staring at Sarah now, wondering what was going on. Sarah didn't move at first. She just stood there, her hands in her pockets, watching Greg squirm. Then, slow and calm, she reached into her jacket and pulled out something small and shiny. It was a badge, the kind you see on TV, with a gold star and official words carved into it. She held it up so everyone could see. "Colonel Sarah Thompson," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Special operation. Those tulips you're so mad about, they're part of a classified operation. You've been messing with federal business, Greg. That's a big problem." The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Neighbors whispered to each other, their eyes huge. "Colonel," one lady muttered. "Special operations," a man said, sounding shocked. The kids on bikes looked at Sarah like she was a superhero. Greg's face turned white, like all the color drained out of him. You're lying," he said, but his voice cracked and he didn't sound sure. His buddies stepped back, their shovels hanging loose, like they didn't know what to do. One of the people from the SUVs, a tall woman with short hair, stepped forward. She held a tablet and she tapped it, pulling up a screen full of papers. She turned it toward Greg, her face serious. "These are official orders," she said, her voice firm.